About this, meanwhile, we'll talk horse racing. As a result of the current COVID-19 crisis, all sport has been brought to a halt in this country. One of the hardest hit is horse racing, which stands to lose hundreds of millions of pounds as a result of inactivity brought along by the pandemic. BBC Radio London's Andy Rowley's been investigating the effect it's having on the sport now and in the long term by getting the views of the owners, trainers and jockeys, plus some of the other men and women who are trying to keep things going while the shutdown continues.
Where the last one, Broome, takes his place in the starting stalls here. 100,000 here on the hill, and the derby is underway. Humanitarian, a slowish start.
Racing fans won't be packing the stands and leaning over the rails anytime soon, but just how has horse racing in this country been able to cope with the enforced closure of tracks, the prospect of racing behind closed doors, and how will the sport be affected if the deep pockets of the owners start to get squeezed? Charlie Liverton is the Chief Executive of the Racehorse Owners Association.
The implication on racing is quite substantial. We are in a slightly unique situation in that we cannot furlough our staff as many other industries can because of the fact that we're looking after horses. So we have a welfare case on our hands here, and in order to maintain the staff within the industry, those horses have to stay in training, and for those horses to stay in training, owners are the lifeblood of the industry, and we need to ensure that they can continue to pay the bills. They need to be exercised, but at the same time, all of our businesses are suffering cash flow and cost issues. Without racing, there's a serious financial situation. If we don't resume by the end of June, then we'll have lost revenues of somewhere in the region of £200 million as an industry. And for owners, there will be missed prize money of some 30 million between now and the end of June. Now, that's quite a substantial gap to fill for owners, given that they are still paying their training bill, but there's absolutely no income coming in.
Surely only these 5 count, 2 out. Native River, Richard Johnson might bite Nico de Bonville. They've been so dominant, and they're now clearing away with 1 left to jump. Native River and Might Bite, like two prize fighters, slugging it out onto the running. Native River, so strong. Might Bite now a length away. Richard Johnson, is he going to win another Gold Cup on Native River? He is. It's been an amazing all-the-way win, and Native River has won a memorable Cheltenham Gold Cup. A brilliant
Champion jockey Richard Johnson will have been frustrated to miss the Grand National, but he says the biggest worry is what shape the sport will be in when it resumes.
You know, you've got jockeys, you've got trainers, you've got stable staff, you've got owners as well. You know, the whole racing industry is affected, and I'm probably, some of us are lucky to have perhaps slightly more savings than others. But again, I think it's affecting everybody. I think, like you say, not just jockeys and trainers and stable staff. I think the owners as well of paying a trainer to have horse in training when there's no racing is very, it's a very hard thing to realistically for an owner to warrant doing. You know, a lot of owners will have been affected through their business or through their work as well from the virus. So, they're under pressure as well. So, again, it's going to put pressure on the number of horses that stay in training. So, whenever racing does come back, I think that, again, that's a worry for me, is the fact that how many horses will actually be there, and owners in a position to hopefully carry on with owning horses and to continue in that vein.
Horse racing employs 6,000 people in this country, and there are 14,000 horses in training. That's a lot of mouths to feed.
My name is John Sharp. I run a company called J Sharp Nutrition Limited. I've been in the horse feed industry for pretty much 40 years now. We're pretty lucky with the supply of feed being uninterrupted, other than a few national hunt stables which have closed down. I feel particularly sorry for them because they have no racing, point-to-pointing or national hunt racing, which looks like resuming at the very earliest, 1st of July. The flat stables are still pretty full. They still have a season potentially starting 1st of May, but now they're saying could be a little later, especially now they've put the beginners back a month from the Derby meeting. Royal Ascot, by all accounts, seems to be going ahead probably behind closed doors. But it's the future I fear for, because already the first of the flat influence sales, the breed-up sales, have been cancelled. So therefore, those horses will be on the market, but it'll have to be a private market because there are no bloodstock sales and none in the foreseeable future.
Jimmy George, Marketing Director at Tattersalls, based here in Newmarket in Suffolk. Tattersalls are Europe's largest bloodstock auctioneers. Sales that we would hope to have staged by now or to have staged in the next couple of weeks have not been able to take place. The impact of that is that obviously stock that was purchased specifically to resell at Tattersalls at this time of year in April and early May is unable to come to the marketplace and to find new buyers, which in itself poses major problems for those guys who own the horses at this stage. They've invested an awful lot of money into those horses. This particular sector of our market, we would expect to turn over around £20 million.
I'm Troy Steve, Newmarket-based bloodstock agent. Been agenting on my own now for about 10 or 12 years. And I suppose the easiest way to describe my position is effectively a real estate agent for horses. You're either looking to sell or buy, and I look to facilitate putting those two parties together. The thoroughbred industry traditionally in these sort of tough economic times bounces back quite well, but you've got the hardship of wallets actually playing out. You know, that impact's going to be very far-reaching. I mean, I was reading some figures there this morning talking about a downturn in GDP in the region of 6%. Well, at the end of the day, the end product of our industry is in many ways a leisure industry. And, if you've got people who, for example, have quite successful businesses and have a couple of horses in training, their concern now is keeping their quite successful business up and running. Having a couple of horses in training can very much fall by the wayside, and, that can have massive impacts for my industry.
While the flat jockeys are gearing up for a potential restart behind closed doors as soon as next month, jump jockeys like Sam Twiston-Davies and John Joe O'Neill Jr. have got months to go yet.
At this time, I definitely feel more sorry for the flat, because obviously their season, they're missing a huge chunk of their season already. And with all the classics and stuff, the 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, it's very important each year for breeders and trainers and owners and jockeys to have them kind of races, because, it's a whole breeding industry. So, it probably doesn't affect jump racing as much as it has the flat, but at the same time, it's very hard to keep businesses afloat when there's no horses in, there's no income coming in, so it is difficult for everyone. But at the same time, everyone is in the same boat, so we just have to kind of ride the wave, I think.
We've got a lot of staff that obviously now are relying on furlough and such. So without the horses in there, normally we'd still have plenty of work to be done. But with it the way it is, obviously a lot of owners of the horses are under scrutiny from everything that's going on, and it's not as easy for them. From a trainer's point of view, you're trying to do what's best from a business point, but at the same time you don't want it to fall out or upset any of your owners.
Well, some jump horses are on their holidays at the moment, as some would say. Turned out as they won't be racing anytime soon, and trainer Ed Vaughan, while busy with flat horses, feels for those jump trainers who have a big gap in their calendar.
I've had a few friends that train jumpers, and they had to turn them out when the racing was finished. Obviously, when it finished in straight the middle of March, they had horses, the young horses coming through, and some horses that were waiting to run in maybe Punchestown, and they'd be the bigger tracks, obviously. But it ended up like they're not going to be racing, so they got turned out a lot earlier. They might be a bit later coming back in.
Cheltenham Gold Cup then is what we've been waiting all week for. We've seen sensational performances on a daily basis, but this is the one that counts. Such tension here in the grandstands. How will those riders be feeling right now then, Luke? Hearts are pumping?
Yeah, they certainly will, and away they go, John.
The Cheltenham Gold Cup then with 22 fences. Road to Riches, the first to show, with the novice Coneygree right up there and on his own as well. Those three.
What it feels like going forward is that it is pretty frightening, because what's going to happen to the economy? Are we going to have any owners? And when are we going to be racing?
Sarah Bradstock famously trained the novice Coneygree to success in the 2015 Cheltenham Gold Cup.
One to jump! This would be one for the Romantics. Coneygree is over, still in front. Now the hill. It's a big ask. Coneygree drifting off the true line. Road to Riches and Jackadam finishing very fast on the far side. Coneygree is all out. Jackadam the final challenger. But Coneygree has won the Cheltenham Gold Cup as a novice, ridden by amateur rider Nico de Bonville. A fairy tale.
Our owners have all been very very supportive, with the exception of a couple, and none of them have said, "Oh my God, I'm going broke." But I would imagine if you had owners who were involved in pubs or restaurants, you'd be very worried. And who knows how deep the recession is going to be. People say that racing is recession-proof because it's the very rich, but it's not really anymore. And no, that would worry me. We're always on the lookout for more owners, as everybody is. If there's less money to go around, obviously that's going to be a concern. We just have to work harder at it.
Tattersalls are trying to reschedule their sales, but they're having to ensure that they will be fully compliant with all restrictions that might still be in place. So they will be exploring online methods and other ways of getting round things. Here's Jimmy George from the company again.
The thoroughbred market, just like so many others, is inextricably tied into prevailing economic factors as well. We're tied into the global economy very, very tightly, and when everything's rosy, then bloodstock sales tend to reflect that, and when things are less rosy, demand for thoroughbreds dwindles as well, and obviously this will have a massive impact on demand for thoroughbreds, just as there'll be a massive impact on the demand for all sorts of other goods. So, we're no more immune than anybody else, and this will have what's going on at the moment will have a major impact on the bloodstock market, not just in Britain, Ireland and France, but throughout the world.
Racing relies on its owners, trainers, jockeys and countless more, but it also relies on the broadcasters and, of course, the bookmakers. Here's Paddy Power.
Racing, hopefully, is one of the sports that's able to do social distancing, you can obviously behind closed doors and that, but racing is one of the sports that could come back, but we're probably one of the early ones to come back. And then when it's one of the only sports on, you might find that, not even from a betting perspective, just from a racing perspective, that people will, you never know, you might actually generate much more interest than you normally would into just racing as a sport. In a very optimistic, weird way, there might be an opportunity here for racing to broaden its appeal if it's one of the first sports to come back behind closed doors.
Troy Steve thinks the real effects might not be seen for a while yet.
It just depends how big that impact is, and probably a lot of it, how quickly we can come out of it. As I say, breeding's gone on as normal. The foal crop next year is probably going to be in or about what it would have been forecast to be 3 months ago. It's just how much money there is at the end of the cycle to pay for these animals.
The Resumption of Racing Group, which is made up of people from across the industry, released a statement this week saying, "We anticipate that the early stage models for resumption would allow horses to race behind closed doors under strict conditions, such as quarantine or tight social distancing measures, at locations which meet specific criteria around risk mitigation and infection control." They would also attempt to limit pressure on the NHS by utilising medical staff, ambulances and hospitals from the private sector. Charlie Liverton knows restarting racing is a sensitive issue, but the clock is ticking for everyone in the industry.
This isn't about a day at the races anymore. This is about working with the rest of the country to try and bring this dreadful pandemic to a close as soon as possible, and ensuring the livelihoods of the thousands of people in the rural communities that they directly and indirectly employ. The rural economy is under threat. We know that. And the longer we can't race, the more support and protection our businesses, individuals and horses will need. Like all sports and all businesses, we need some financial stimulus. And without it, the impact could be quite devastating going forward.
It's a great finish here, a desperate finish uphill to the line. Sir Dragonet with Anthony Van Dyke, mad move there on the outside as well. Races Japan, but it was just Anthony Van Dyke in an almost five-way photo finish. A record-equaling 7th derby for Aidan O'Brien. Anthony Van Dyke has won it, ridden by Shamie Heffernan, who's been second twice.
Andy Rowley there reporting on the lockdown and how it affects horse racing in this country. Of course, it was the last major sporting event which took place in the Cheltenham Festival in many respects. And Andy, they're saying it could be one of the first sports to get back. It caused controversy, Cheltenham. It still does, people discussing it. But as we heard from Paddy Power and others, I mean, there's a need for the economy to get going, I suppose sports to get going. And there is a suggestion that racing could get going quicker than some others.
Well, certainly the flat racing, seemingly, Phil, possibly next month. We heard there from the Racehorse Owners Association Chief Exec Charlie Liverton, and he was saying that to me that it's not necessarily now about a day at the races, everyone's thinking, oh, well, dress up, put our hats on and everything. It's actually getting some racing going to keep a lot of businesses within the industry and the rural economy alive. And while some people will say, oh, well, there's some owners out there with, very deep pockets, they should be able to cope. The worry for a lot of people in the industry, which was reflected by some of the voices there, is that there are some people who maybe have businesses in the retail sector. They might be involved in restaurants and bars and cafes and that sort of thing. If they're not bringing any money in there, then really, are they going to continue to support owning racehorses? And that's where the trickle-down effect will leave some people who work in the industry, in the stables, in a very bad way, but also, of course, the horses in a very bad way.
Thank you, Andy. Now another